They didn't just want my inheritance, they wanted my freedom, my dignity, and my name stripped away in broad daylight. When the officer's heavy hand landed on my shoulder in Terminal 4, I didn't tremble with fear. I trembled because I knew the trap my grandfather had spent 10 years engineering had finally snapped shut. My parents, in their blind greed, had just pulled the pin on a live grenade without even realizing it. My name is Alara Vance, and at 6:45 in the morning, Liberty International Airport smelled like burnt hazelnut coffee, floor wax, and the specific, high-stakes anxiety of 3,000 people trying to be somewhere else. The air conditioning was set to a temperature that felt less like climate control and more like aggressive preservation. Cold enough to bite through the thin fabric of my blazer, I stood in the priority security line, not because I was wealthy, but because time was the one currency I could not afford to devalue. In my right hand, I gripped the handle of a silver aluminum briefcase. It was not a modern, sleek carry-on with frictionless wheels. It was a vintage Halliburton, dented in the corners, heavy, and locked with two separate mechanical combinations that existed only in the firing synapses of my hippocampus. Inside that case lay the remnants of Arthur Sterling's life. To the rest of the world, Arthur was just a wealthy eccentric who had died of heart failure 3 weeks ago. To me, he was the only father figure who had ever looked at me without calculating my net worth. And to my parents, he was a $500 million piggy bank they were desperate to smash open. My phone buzzed against my hip bone, a sharp, angry insect demanding attention. I did not need to look at the screen to know who it was, but I pulled it out anyway, force of habit being the hardest thing to break. The text message was from a contact saved simply as Mother. "Come home, Alara. Don't make a scene at the courthouse. You are not well. We can handle the estate." I stared at the words. The gaslighting was so casual, so practiced. It almost felt comforting in its predictability. Beatrice Vance did not send texts. She sent commands wrapped in the thin, poisonous paper of maternal concern. She wanted me to turn around. She wanted me to get in an Uber, go back to the stifling silence of my apartment, and let the judge in Blackwood County declare me absent. If I missed the hearing at 10 o'clock this morning, the petition my parents had filed a petition claiming I was mentally unfit to administer the estate would be granted by default. They would become the executors. They would bury Arthur's legacy under a mountain of liquidations and luxury real estate deals. I slid the phone back into my pocket without replying. Silence is the only language narcissists understand because it is the only thing that reflects nothing back to them. "Next," the TSA agent barked. I stepped forward. The plastic bins clattered against the stainless steel rollers. Shoes off, laptop out, liquids in a quart-sized bag. The ritual was mundane, designed to make you feel like cattle, but today it felt like walking a tightrope over a pit of vipers. I placed the silver briefcase flat on the belt. I did not let go of the handle until the rubber flaps of the X-ray machine swallowed it whole. "Laptop in a separate bin," the agent said, his voice a drone of boredom. "It is," I said, my voice steady. "That case does not contain a computer. It contains legal documents." He didn't look up. He just waved me through the body scanner. I stepped into the glass cylinder, raised my arms like a surrender, and waited for the whir of the millimeter wave machine. It spun around me, a mechanical eye stripping me down to data points. I held my breath. I had nothing on me. No metal, no contraband, nothing but the clothes on my back and the weight of a 10-year-old promise to an old man. The machine stopped. The glass doors slid open. I stepped out, expecting the usual bored wave to move along. Instead, the air in the security checkpoint changed. It wasn't a sound. It was a sudden, pressurized silence that radiated from the monitor station. I looked at the TSA agent behind the screen. He wasn't looking at the next passenger. He was staring at his monitor, his posture rigid. The reflection in his glasses was not the cool blue or gray of a normal scan. It was flashing, a pulsing, angry red that seemed to bleed out into the sterile white light of the terminal. "Stop," he said. He didn't shout, but the word cut through the ambient noise of the terminal like a gunshot. "Ma'am, stop right there. Do not move." I froze. My socks gripped the cold linoleum. "Is there a problem?" He didn't answer me. He keyed his radio, his eyes never leaving me. "Code red at lane 4. Supervisor and LEO requested immediately. Level 3 containment." Level 3. My stomach dropped, not with fear, but with a sudden, icy clarity. Level 3 wasn't a water bottle left in a backpack. Level 3 wasn't a forgotten pocket knife. Level 3 was a threat. Before I could ask another question, the environment shifted with terrifying speed. The mundane shuffle of the security line evaporated. 2 uniformed airport police officers materialized from the periphery, their hands resting on their holsters, their movements sharp and predatory. But it wasn't the police that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It was the man walking behind them. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my car. Charcoal gray, tailored to hide the bulk of a shoulder holster. He didn't have the weary, overworked look of the TSA or the local cops. He had the dead-eyed, shark-like focus of federal law enforcement. They flanked me, the crowd of travelers, sensing the danger, recoiled. A gap opened up around me, a circle of isolation that felt like a spotlight. "Elara Vance," the man in the suit asked. He didn't ask it like a question. He said it like he was reading a label on a specimen jar. "Yes," I said. I forced my hands to stay at my sides. Visible, open. "What is going on? I have a hearing in Blackwood County at 10. I cannot be late." "Turn around," one of the uniformed officers said, his voice loud enough to carry to the coffee bean and tea leaf kiosk 50 feet away. "Hands behind your back." "Am I under arrest?" I asked, my voice rising slightly despite my best efforts to keep it level. "For what I haven't done anything." "Ma'am, turn around, now." The officer grabbed my arm. His grip was not gentle. It was a vice, designed to assert dominance and provoke a reaction. He spun me around, and I felt the cold bite of steel cuffs ratchet shut around my wrists. The sound was distinct, a mechanical click, click, click that seemed to echo off the high ceilings. That was when I saw the phones. A dozen of them, travelers, bored and hungry for drama, had their smartphones raised. I saw the camera lenses pointed at me, the little red recording dots active. I could see the captions they were already typing in their heads. "Terrorist at Liberty Airport. Crazy woman arrested. Breaking news." My parents didn't just want me detained. They wanted me destroyed. They wanted footage. They wanted a public record of their daughter being led away in handcuffs by federal agents so they could play it on a loop for the probate judge. "Look, Your Honor, look how unstable she is. Look how dangerous." "This is a mistake," I said, speaking clearly, aiming my voice not at the officers, but at the recording phones. "I am being harassed. My name is Elara Vance, and I am being targeted to prevent my attendance at a court hearing." "Quiet," the suit said. He stepped close to me, invading my personal space. He smelled of peppermint and gun oil. "You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it." They marched me through the terminal. It was a parade of shame. I had to walk in my socks, my shoes left behind in the gray bin. My silver briefcase was in the gloved hand of the second police officer, held away from his body like it contained a radioactive isotope. Every step was a struggle to maintain my dignity while being paraded like a trophy kill. People whispered. Mothers pulled their children closer. A man in a business suit shook his head with performative disgust. I ran through the inventory of my luggage in my mind. I had packed that bag myself. I had checked the lining. I had checked the pockets. Had someone slipped a bag of cocaine into the side pocket while I was printing my boarding pass? I never took my hand off the handle. Had Beatrice hired someone to plant a gun? We reached a nondescript steel door next to the family restroom. The officer swiped a keycard, and the noise of the terminal, the announcements. The chatter. The rolling wheels vanished instantly as the door sealed shut behind us. The room was small, windowless, and aggressively sterile. The walls were painted a color that could only be described as institutional despair. There was a metal table bolted to the floor and 3 metal chairs. A large mirror on one wall indicated the observation room on the other side. They pushed me into a chair. The cuffs stayed on. The air here was even colder than the terminal, a meat locker chill that made my teeth ache. The man in the charcoal suit walked to the other side of the table. He didn't sit. He stood there, looking down at me with a mixture of contempt and professional boredom. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He didn't hand it to me. He slapped it onto the metal table with a sound like a whip crack. "Do you know what that is, Ms. Vance?" he asked. "It looks like a warrant," I said. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a trapped bird, but I kept my face frozen. "But since I haven't committed a crime, I assume it is a work of fiction." He laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "You have a smart mouth. Let's see if you're still witty when you're facing 20 years in federal prison." He leaned forward, placing his knuckles on the table. "We received a credible tip at 6 o'clock this morning," he said. "Detailed, specific. The source claimed you were transporting high-level contraband." "My father called you," I said flatly. "Or my mother. Let me guess. They said I had drugs, or maybe they said I had a weapon." The agent shook his head slowly. "Drugs, no. We don't bring in the bureau for a bag of weed, Ms. Vance, and we don't clear a security lane for a pocket knife." He tapped the warrant with his index finger. "The report states that you are in possession of stolen classified intelligence related to national security," he said, watching my eyes for a reaction, "and that you have expressed intent to utilize biological materials to cause a mass casualty event." The room seemed to tilt on its axis. National security, biological materials. I stared at him, my brain stalling for a fraction of a second. This wasn't just a false report. This wasn't just a prank to make me miss a flight. This was nuclear. My parents hadn't just accused me of being a nuisance. They had accused me of being a terrorist. They had invoked the Patriot Act. They had weaponized the entire apparatus of the United States government to ensure that I wouldn't just be late, I would be disappeared into a federal holding cell for days, maybe weeks, while the forensic teams tore my life apart. "That is insanity," I whispered. "I am a data analyst. I am going to a probate hearing. That briefcase contains deeds and affidavits." "Then you won't mind if we open it," the agent said. He signaled to the officer holding my case. "You need a lawyer present for that," I said, my voice hardening. "Not for a national security threat," he replied. "Exigent circumstances. We open it now." The officer set the silver case on the table. He put on a pair of thick black nitrile gloves. He looked at the locks. "Combinations?" the agent asked. I looked at the case. I looked at the mirror where I knew a camera was recording every micro-expression on my face. If I refused, they would drill the locks. If I gave them the code, I was consenting to the search. But I had no choice. Time was bleeding away. It was already 7:15. "Left lock," I said, my voice cold. 3 right, 18 left, 4 right, right lock, 10 left, 5 right, 22 left. The officer spun the dials. The clicks were loud in the small room. Click, click, click. He hit the latches. They snapped open with a heavy metallic sound. The agent stepped back, his hand hovering near his waist, as if expecting anthrax to billow out into the room. The officer lifted the lid. I watched their faces. I expected confusion. I expected them to see stacks of paper, legal binders, perhaps the old photograph of my grandfather and me fishing at Lake Tahoe. But the officer didn't look confused. He looked tense. He reached into the lining of the lid, his gloved fingers probing a seam that I knew shouldn't have been loose. "Sir," the officer said, his voice tight, "I have something here." He pulled his hand back. Held between his thumb and forefinger was a small, heat-sealed plastic bag. Inside, a fine white powder shifted like dust. My blood turned to ice. I hadn't put that there. I had checked that bag 3 times before I left my apartment. I had slept with it next to my bed. "Well, well," the agent said, his smile returning, sharp and predatory. "It looks like the tip was accurate. Bag and tag it, and get the hazmat team on standby." He looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw the reflection of my own destruction. "Elara Vance," he said, "you are in a lot of trouble." The silence in the room following the discovery of the plastic bag was heavy enough to crush bone. The officer holding the silver briefcase froze, his gloved fingers hovering over the white powder like he was touching a live wire. Agent Harrow did not freeze. He seemed to expand, his presence filling the cramped interrogation room with a suffocating density. He looked at the bag, then he looked at me, and his expression shifted from professional suspicion to something far more dangerous pity. It was the specific kind of pity reserved for the broken, the manic, and the dangerous. "Biological agent," Harrow said, the words rolling off his tongue with practiced gravity. "Ricin anthrax, or is it just crushed-up painkillers you forgot you were carrying?" "I am not carrying painkillers," I said. My voice sounded thin in the recycled air, but I forced it to remain steady. "And I am certainly not carrying biological weapons. I have never seen that bag before in my life." Harrow pulled out the metal chair across from me and sat down. The screech of the legs against the linoleum was deliberate, a sonic weapon designed to fray nerves. He leaned in close. "Elara," he said, using my first name, a tactic to build false intimacy. "We spoke to the source who called in the tip. They were very worried about you. They told us about your history." My spine stiffened. "My history." "The episodes," he said softly. "The paranoia. The delusions of persecution. They told us you stopped taking your medication 3 weeks ago, right after your grandfather passed away. They said you've been spiraling, talking about conspiracies, believing your family is out to get you." I stared at him. The brilliance of Marcus and Beatrice Vance was not in their cruelty, but in their narrative construction. They hadn't just reported a bomb. They had reported a mental health crisis armed with a weapon. If I got angry, I was manic. If I stayed calm, I was disassociated. Every reaction I had would be filtered through the lens of insanity they had polished for me. "I do not have a history of mental illness," I said, enunciating every syllable. "I have a history of being the daughter of 2 narcissists who are currently losing control of a 9-figure estate." Harrow sighed, leaning back and crossing his arms. "The officer found a bag of powder sewn into the lining of your case. That is a fact. It is right there. Are you telling me your parents broke into a secured airport terminal, bypassed TSA, and sewed that into your bag while you were standing in line?" "I am telling you they hired someone to do it," I said. "Or they distracted me. It does not matter how. What matters is that if you test that powder, you will find flour or baking soda. It is a prop. It is theater designed to keep me in this room until 10 o'clock this morning." Harrow signaled the uniformed officer. "Field test it, but keep the hazmat protocols active." The officer nodded and moved to a side counter, retrieving a chemical testing kit. While he worked, Harrow turned his attention back to the open briefcase. "Let's see what else you're protecting so fiercely," he said. He reached into the case, bypassing the spot where the powder had been hidden. He pulled out the laptop first. It was a ThinkPad, heavy and thick, the kind of machine that prioritized durability over aesthetics. It was 7 years old. "Ancient tech," Harrow noted, flipping it over. "No wireless card. The port is taped over." "It is air-gapped," I said. "It has never connected to the internet. It contains the only digital copy of the estate ledger my grandfather kept for 40 years. Harrow didn't look impressed. He set the laptop aside and pulled out the rest of the contents, a thick, leather-bound folder. He opened it. It wasn't blueprints for a bomb. It wasn't a manifesto. It was medical records, hundreds of pages of them, flagged with yellow sticky notes. "Arthur Sterling," Harrow read the name on the top file. "Cardiac arrest, hospice care logs, toxicology reports." He looked up at me, his brow furrowing. "Why are you carrying a dead man's medical charts to a probate hearing?" "Because they prove he was lucid," I said. "My parents are arguing he was suffering from dementia when he signed the final codicil to his will. Those records prove his mind was sharp until the moment his heart stopped. They prove he knew exactly what he was doing when he cut Marcus and Beatrice out of the trust." Harrow flipped through a few more pages, He was looking for the crazy. He was looking for the scribblings of a madwoman. Instead, he found organized, chronological evidence. He hesitated. I saw the crack in his armor. The cognitive dissonance was hitting him. Crazy people do not typically organize toxicology reports by date and physician's signature. You said the tip was anonymous, I said, seizing the opening. But you also said they knew about my medication. You cannot have it both ways. Agent Harrow, either it was a random tip from a concerned citizen who saw something suspicious, or it was a specific report from someone who claims to know my medical history. Which is it? Harrow's eyes narrowed. We verify our sources, Ms. Vance. Do you? I leaned forward as far as the handcuffs would allow. My name is Alara Vance. I am a senior data analyst for CyberCore Security Solutions. I hold a Level 4 clearance for corporate data handling. I know the algorithm the FBI uses to triage threats. You use a weighted scoring system based on specificity and immediacy. This tip scored high because it was specific about the threat, biological, and specific about the target me. But did you verify the caller ID? Harrow went still. The call was routed through a blocked number. It was a burner, I corrected him. But even burners leave digital footprints if you know where to look. And I know you didn't just take their word for it. You said they described me. Let me guess. They told you I was wearing a navy blazer, a white silk blouse, and black slacks. They told you I was carrying a vintage Halliburton case. Harrow didn't answer, which was an answer in itself. They described me perfectly, I pressed, which means they were watching me, not from yesterday, from this morning, from the terminal. That suggests valid surveillance of a threat, Harrow countered. It suggests stalking, I snapped. Agent Harrow, I have a recording. On my phone. It is in my left pocket. You seized it when I came in. Harrow glanced at the evidence bag on the corner of the table where my phone sat. Dark and silent. We are not accessing your device without a subpoena, he said. I am giving you consent, I said. Unlock it. The passcode is 4820. Go to the voice memos. The most recent file. It is stamped 9 p.m. last night. Harrow looked at the officer testing the powder. The officer shook his head slightly. Inconclusive so far. It's not reacting to the standard bio-threat reagents. I'm running the narcotics panel now. Harrow looked back at me. He was losing the absolute certainty he had walked in with. He picked up the evidence bag, opened it, and slid my phone out. He punched in the code. He found the app. Press play, I said. He tapped the screen. The audio was crystal clear. Recorded in the high fidelity of a quiet room, my father's voice, Marcus Vance, filled the interrogation cell. It was the voice he used when the public wasn't watching low, smooth, and terrifying. You think you can just walk into that courtroom and take what isn't yours? Alara, you're a child. You don't know how the world works. Stay home. If you try to board that plane, I promise you, you will disappear from the map. You won't make it to Blackwood. You won't make it anywhere. We will bury you under so much red tape you won't be able to breathe. The recording ended. The silence that followed was different this time. It wasn't heavy with accusation. It was heavy with calculation. Harrow stared at the phone. The threat was explicit. Red tape. Disappear from the map. It didn't sound like a worried father talking about a mentally ill daughter. It sounded like a mob boss. He said red tape, I said softly. And 12 hours later, here I am, wrapped in it. You are the red tape, Agent Harrow. You are the weapon he promised. Harrow set the phone down. He looked at the warrant again. This doesn't prove the powder isn't dangerous. It just proves your father is an asshole. Domestic disputes don't preclude terrorism. The tip described my clothes, I repeated. Exactly as I'm wearing them now. I bought this blazer yesterday. My parents haven't seen me in 3 weeks. The only way the caller knew what I was wearing is if they were watching the airport feeds or if they had someone on the ground here. The officer at the counter cleared his throat. Agent Harrow narcotics panel is negative. Explosives trace is negative. It looks like powdered sugar and baking soda. I'd need a lab to be 100% sure, but this isn't anthrax. Harrow let out a long breath through his nose. The tension in his shoulders dropped an inch. He looked at the bag of white powder, then at the thick medical files, and finally at me. He was realizing that he had mobilized a response team for a baking ingredient. "If that is baking soda," I said, "then someone planted it to trigger a hazmat response. That is a federal crime. Filing a false report of terrorism is a felony punishable by up to 20 years in prison. If you continue to hold me, knowing this, you are complicit in a civil rights violation." Harrow stood up. He walked to the mirror, staring at his own reflection, or perhaps at the people watching from the other side. He was angry, not at me, but at the situation. He hated being played. "You say you work for Cybercorps," he said, turning back. "So you know that even if this is a hoax, I have to clear you. I have to process the paperwork. That takes time." "I do not have time," I said. "I have 2 hours and 45 minutes to get to Blackwood County. The flight I was supposed to be on has just pushed back from the gate. I heard the announcement before you dragged me in here." "That's not my problem," Harrow said, though his voice lacked the earlier bite. "It is your problem," I countered, "because when I walk out of here, and I will walk out of here, I am going to file a formal complaint regarding the lack of due diligence on that tip. Unless—" I paused. This was the gamble. "Unless what?" Harrow asked. "Unless you help me prove who made the call," I said. "You have the resources. You can unmask a burner phone in 10 minutes if you want to. You can pull the geolocation data. You said the tip was specific about my clothing. That means the caller was here. Or they had a video feed. Check the IP address of the call. If it pinged off a tower near the Vance estate in Silicon Valley, or if it came from inside this terminal, you have your perpetrator." Harrow looked at me for a long moment. He was weighing the risk, helping a suspect versus nailing a liar who wasted FBI time. "I can't give you that data," he said. "It's part of an active investigation." "I don't need you to give it to me," I said. "I just need you to look at it. Just look. If I am right, if that call came from my parents' location or their associates, then you know this is a setup. And if it is a setup, you have no grounds to hold me." Harrow tapped his finger on the metal table. Tap, tap, tap. "Check the bag for prints," he ordered the officer. "And get tech support on the line. I want the metadata on the tip line call. Now." The officer nodded and hurried out. Harrow sat back down. He looked tired. "If you're wrong, Alara, you're going to miss more than just a court date." "I'm not wrong," I said. "This isn't national security. Agent, this is a $500 million dispute, and you are just the hired muscle they didn't have to pay for." Harrow didn't argue. He just watched me, and for the first time since the handcuffs clicked shut, I felt the balance of power shift. It wasn't much, just a hairline fracture in their wall. But it was enough. I just hoped it was enough to get me out before the judge in Blackwood raised his gavel and handed my life over to the people who had tried to erase it. The tech from the lab breezed into the interrogation room 10 minutes later, holding a printout that looked deceptively boring for something that had nearly triggered a national lockdown. He didn't look at me. He looked at Agent Harrow and slid the paper across the metal table. "It's flour," the tech said, his voice flat with disappointment. "Specifically, high-gluten bread flour mixed with a bit of yellow food dye number 5 to make it look chemical. You could bake a decent loaf with it, but you can't kill anyone." Harrow stared at the paper. The muscles in his jaw worked silently. He had mobilized a hazmat unit for baking ingredients. The embarrassment in the room was palpable, radiating off him in waves of heat. "Flour?" Harrow repeated. "You're sure?" 100%. It's safe." Harrow looked at me. The handcuffs were still on my wrists, cold and biting into my skin, but the dynamic had shifted completely. I wasn't a terrorist anymore. I was a waste of his time. "Uncuff her," Harrow said to the uniformed officer. The officer hesitated, then stepped forward and unlocked the restraints. I rubbed my wrists, the blood rushing back into my fingers with a painful prickle. I didn't say thank you. I didn't smile. I reached for my phone on the table. "Agent Harrow," I said, my voice steady. "Now that we have established that I am not a bioterrorist, We need to establish why I am here. Call Silas Thorne." Harrow raised an eyebrow. "Who?" "Silas Thorne. He is the executor of the Arthur Sterling estate and a senior partner at Thorne and Associates. He is expecting me in court at 10 o'clock. He can verify everything I have told you." I unlocked my phone and pulled up the contact. I hit the speaker button and set it on the table between us. It rang twice. "Elara." Silas's voice filled the small room, sharp with anxiety. "Where are you? The bailiff just did the preliminary roll call. Your parents are here. Their lawyer is already circling the judge like a shark." "I am at Liberty International." "Silas," I said, "I am currently in an interrogation room with the FBI and the airport police." "What?" Silas sounded like he had choked on his coffee. "Why?" "Because someone tipped them off that I was carrying biological weapons," I said, locking eyes with Harrow. "It turned out to be bread flour." "Dear God," Silas whispered. "It's the default guardianship clause." "Explain that to Agent Harrow," I said. "He needs to understand the stakes." "Agent," Silas said, his voice dropping into his professional litigator tone, "listen to me very carefully. The hearing today is to determine the competency of the heir designate Miss Vance. If she is not physically present in that courtroom when the gavel drops at 10 a.m., the court defaults to the next of kin. That means Marcus and Beatrice Vance get immediate, unchecked control over $500 million in assets. They have a $500 million incentive to make sure she never gets on a plane." Harrow looked at the phone, then at me. The pieces were clicking into place. The specificity of the tip, the harmless but scary-looking powder, the timing. "We traced the call," a voice said from the doorway. It was the tech support officer Harrow had sent out earlier. He was holding a tablet. "It's messy, but we got a hit." Harrow grabbed the tablet. "Show me." "The call came from a burner phone," the officer explained. "Activated this morning at 5 a.m. But here's the kicker. The phone didn't ping off a random tower. It pinged off a private microcell, the kind rich people install in their estates to get better reception in the hills." "Location," Harrow asked. 104 Skyline Drive, Silicon Valley," the officer read. "Registered to a holding company called V-Tech Ventures." "That is my father's company," I said, "and that is my parents' home address." Harrow stared at the screen. The evidence was irrefutable. The call that had wasted federal resources, shut down a security lane, and detained an innocent woman had originated from the very people who stood to profit from her absence. "Wait," I said. "There is more. The tipster knew exactly where the powder was. They knew it was in the lining. They knew I was at the airport. How did they get it in there?" I grabbed my laptop, my air-gapped, heavy ThinkPad, and booted it up. It took a painfully long minute. I plugged in my phone via a USB cable. "I have a dash cam in my car," I said as I typed. "It records 24/7, triggered by motion, and uploads to a secure cloud when my phone is in range. I parked in the short-term garage at 5:30. I stopped for coffee at the kiosk in the lobby at 5:45. I left my bag on the table for exactly 90 seconds while I grabbed napkins. I pulled up the file. The timestamp read 5:46 a.m. The camera angle was from the windshield of my car, parked facing the glass wall of the terminal lobby. Through the glass, you could see me standing at the counter, and you could see my silver briefcase sitting on the table. A woman walked into the frame. She was wearing a large hat and sunglasses, but the coat, a distinctive, camel hair trench coat with gold buttons, was unmistakable. "Beatrice," I whispered. On the screen, my mother didn't look like a grieving daughter. She looked like a professional thief. She moved past my table, bumping it slightly. In one fluid motion, her hand holding something small and white slipped under the handle of my case. She paused for a second, fiddling with the side latch, appearing to check her watch. Then she walked away. "Freeze it there," Harrow said. I hit pause. "Zoom in on her hand," he ordered. I magnified the grainy image. There, tucked against her palm before she touched my bag, was a small, white plastic packet. She didn't sew it in, I realized. The lining of that Halliburton has a Velcro seam for repair. She just shoved it in. Harrow straightened up. The look on his face had changed completely. The professional detachment was gone, replaced by the cold fury of a law enforcement officer who realizes he has been played for a fool. He had been used as a pawn in a family squabble. He had been weaponized. "She planted evidence," Harrow said, his voice low and dangerous. "And her husband called it in. This is conspiracy. This is obstruction of justice. This is filing a false federal report." He looked at me. "You're free to go, Ms. Vance. In fact, I'm going to walk you out myself." "I need a copy of this report," I said. "I need proof that I was detained and exonerated. If I walk into that courtroom late without it, they will spin this as me being irresponsible." "I'll give you better than a report," Harrow said. "I'm giving you an incident number and my direct line, if that judge has any questions. He can call me." I shoved my laptop back into the briefcase. I didn't bother locking it this time. I just grabbed the handle and ran. Harrow kept pace with me, barking orders into his radio to clear a path. We burst out of the interrogation room and back into the terminal. I looked at the departures board. My heart stopped. Flight 492 to Blackwood. Status departed. "No," I breathed. "No, no, no." I ran to the gate counter anyway. The agent there looked up, startled by my disheveled appearance and the FBI agent flanking me. "Flight 492, I gasped. "Did it leave?" "Yes, ma'am," she said. 10 minutes ago. We paged you." "When is the next flight?" Harrow asked. The agent typed, "Not until 2 p.m. Everything else is booked solid." "I need a ticket on anything," I said. "Connecting flights. Anything that gets me close." She shook her head. "I'm sorry, but wait." She frowned at her screen. "Ms. Vance Elara Vance." "Yes." "Your return ticket was canceled," she said, "and you've been placed on the no-fly list by the airline corporate security office." "What?" I slammed my hand on the counter. "Why?" "Notes say, passenger behavior risk, mental instability reported by family member, do not board." I stared at her. My parents hadn't just stopped me from getting on this flight. They had scorched the earth. They had called the airline, pretending to be concerned, and flagged me as a safety risk. Even if there was another plane, no commercial carrier would touch me now. I looked at the clock on the wall. 7:35. The hearing was in Blackwood County, 300 miles away. Driving would take 5 hours. I had less than 2.5. "They won?" I whispered. The realization hit me like a physical blow. They actually won. Harrow looked at the board, then at me. "You can't drive it." "Not in time," I said. "Not with traffic. By the time I get there, the gavel will have dropped and they will be popping champagne." I stood there, surrounded by the noise of travelers going places I couldn't go. I had the truth. I had the evidence. I had an FBI agent ready to testify that my parents were criminals. But none of it mattered if I wasn't physically in that courtroom to present it. The law was cruel in its technicalities. Default is default. Then I remembered. The crypto wallet. Arthur Sterling had been old-fashioned about land and gold, but he had been paranoid about banks. "Always have a back door, Elara," he had told me. "Money the government can't freeze and your parents can't find." He had left me a cold storage USB drive with a private key. I had never touched it. I didn't even know how much was in it, but I knew one thing money talks. And crypto screams. I turned to Harrow. "Is there a private airfield near here, General Aviation?" "There's the executive terminal," he said. "Building C. Why?" "Because I can't fly commercial," I said, grabbing my case. "So I'm going to have to fly myself, or hire someone who doesn't care about a do-not-board list." "You're going to charter a jet?" Harrow asked, skeptical. "That takes hours to set up." "I don't need a jet," I said, my mind racing. "I need something faster. I need something that doesn't wait for slots." I pulled out my phone and opened a browser. I didn't search for airlines. I searched for medical transport helicopters, Liberty Airport. "Ms. Vance," Harrow said, "I can't authorize." "You don't have to authorize anything," I cut him off. "You just have to not arrest me for running through this terminal." I didn't wait for his permission. I took off running toward the shuttle for Building C. My parents had weaponized the bureaucracy against me. They had used the rules of the system to trap me. So the only way to beat them was to stop playing by the rules of the system entirely. I had 2 hours and 25 minutes, and I was going to turn the sky into a racetrack. The automatic doors of the general aviation terminal slid open, and the air that hit me was different from the main concourse. It smelled of unburnt kerosene, hot asphalt, and the distinct, expensive aroma of money. This was where the private jets lived, where billionaires and corporate CEOs bypassed the indignities of removing their shoes and belts. But I wasn't here for luxury. I was here for speed. I scanned the lobby. It was quiet, populated only by a few pilots in crisp white shirts and a receptionist who looked like she had been trained to ignore anyone net worth less than 8 figures. My phone buzzed again. I pulled it out, expecting a call from Agent Harrow or Silas Thorne. Instead, a text message notification sat on the lock screen. It was from Beatrice. "Don't try anymore, sweetie. We are doing this for you. We are worried about your mental health. Just go home and rest. We told the judge you are having an episode." I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the glass. The audacity was breathtaking. They had planted fake anthrax in my luggage, had me detained by the FBI, and now they were texting me with faux maternal concern, gaslighting me into believing my own destruction was an act of love. They were painting a narrative in real time: Alara the unstable daughter, Alara the paranoid manic, Alara who needs to be protected from herself and her inheritance. I deleted the thread. I didn't have time for anger. Anger is a heavy carry-on item, and I needed to travel light. I walked up to the charter desk. The woman behind the marble counter didn't look up from her computer. "I need a plane," I said, breathless. "One way to Blackwood County, now." She looked up, scanning my disheveled appearance. My blazer was wrinkled from the interrogation chair. My hair was escaping its bun, and I was clutching a dented silver briefcase like a lifeline. "Our fleet is fully booked for the morning," she said, her voice cool and dismissive. "The next availability for a light jet is at 4 this afternoon." "I don't need a jet," I said. "I need anything with an engine and a pilot, a prop plane, a helicopter, anything." "We are not a taxi service, ma'am," she said, reaching for a phone to likely call security. I spun around, scanning the tarmac through the floor-to-ceiling glass. I saw a line of sleek Gulf Streams, all quiet. But further down, near the cargo hangars, I saw activity. A single-engine turboprop, a Cessna Caravan, was being loaded. It wasn't glamorous. It was a workhorse, painted a dull utilitarian white with the logo of a logistics company on the tail. But the propeller was spinning. I ran. "Ma'am, you can't go out there," the receptionist shouted. I ignored her. I pushed through the side door marked "Crew Only," ignoring the alarm that chirped, and sprinted across the tarmac. The heat radiating off the pavement was intense. The noise of the engine grew louder, a rhythmic thrum that vibrated in my chest. A man in a yellow safety vest was securing the cargo door. The pilot was already in the cockpit, running his pre-flight checks. "Hey," the man in the vest yelled, stepping in my path. "Restricted area, back off." I stopped, panting, and held up my hands. "I need to speak to the pilot." "He's taxiing in 2 minutes," the man said. "This is a cargo run. Electronic components. No passengers." "I am not a passenger," I said, setting my briefcase down and opening the latches. "I am a priority shipment." I pulled out the small, encrypted USB drive I had retrieved from the lining of the case, the only thing my mother hadn't found because it was magnetized to the frame itself. I plugged it into my phone using an adapter. My fingers flew across the screen, accessing the Tor wallet app Arthur had made me memorize the seed phrase for, Grandpa's emergency fund. I hadn't looked at the balance in 5 years. Arthur had deposited a sum of Bitcoin back when it was considered funny internet money, telling me it was for a rainy day. Today wasn't just raining, it was a hurricane. The balance loaded, $250,000 equivalent. I turned the phone screen toward the man in the vest. "I will transfer $50,000 to this company, or to you personally, right now, I said, my voice shouting over the engine whine. If you let me get on that plane. The man looked at the phone. He looked at the number. Then he looked at me. 50,000. Instant transfer, I said. Crypto, untraceable, tax-free if you are smart about it. He hesitated. It's against regulations, insurance liability. 75,000, I said without blinking. And I sign a waiver. I was never here. The pilot had opened his window, looking down at the commotion. The man in the vest signaled him. They exchanged a look, the universal look of working-class men realizing they could pay off their mortgages in a single morning. The pilot killed the engine. The propeller slowed to a halt. Get in, the pilot yelled. But you sit on a crate. We don't have seats. I scrambled up the metal ladder into the fuselage. The interior of the plane was stripped bare. No carpet, no insulation, just the ribbed metal skeleton of the aircraft and pallets of boxes strapped down with orange webbing. It smelled of hydraulic fluid and ozone. Strap into the cargo net, the pilot called back from the cockpit. We are heavy, and there is a storm front moving over the valley. It's going to be rough. Just fly, I said, wrapping a nylon strap around my wrist and gripping the cargo netting. Fly fast. The engine roared back to life, louder this time from the inside. The plane shuddered and began to roll. There was no safety briefing. There was no beverage service. There was just the raw physics of lift and thrust. We accelerated down the runway, and I felt the wheels leave the ground. We were airborne. I looked at my watch, 8:10. I had less than 2 hours to cover 300 miles in a slow-moving cargo plane, land at a remote airfield, and find a way to the courthouse. I pulled out my laptop. The vibration of the plane was intense, rattling my teeth, making the screen shake. I wedged the computer between my knees and 2 boxes marked fragile. Circuit boards. Do we have Wi-Fi? I shouted toward the cockpit. Satellite uplink, the pilot yelled back. It's slow. Don't try to stream Netflix. I didn't need Netflix. I needed justice. I connected to the network. It was agonizingly slow. The signal bar flickering between 1 and 2 bars. I opened my secure email client and dialed Silas Thorne on voice over IP. The connection hissed and popped. Elara. Silas's voice was tinny, breaking up. Are you on a plane? Cargo flight, I yelled. I am en route. ETA is 90 minutes. What is happening at the courthouse? It's bad, Silas said. Your parents just filed a supplemental motion, emergency ex parte. Based on what I asked, I was cleared. Agent Harrow let me go. They aren't citing the clearance, Silas said. They are citing the arrest. I felt the blood drain from my face. What? I am looking at the filing right now, Silas said. They attached a copy of the airport police incident log. It shows that at 7 o'clock this morning, you were detained for possession of a suspected biological agent and making threats against national security. That is it. That is where the documentation stops. That is a lie by omission, I shouted. I was released. It was flour. Agent Harrow confirmed it. The judge doesn't know that, Silas said, his voice urgent. All the judge sees is a police report from 2 hours ago saying the heir is a terrorism suspect. Marcus and Beatrice are arguing that your presence in the courtroom would be a safety risk to the public. They are asking the judge to bar you from the building and proceed with the guardianship hearing in your absence. The plane hit an air pocket, dropping 50 feet in a second. My stomach lurched, but I barely noticed. They are using the paper trail they created. I realized. They had me arrested to generate the document, and now they are using the document to lock me out. The hearing starts in 1 hour and 40 minutes, Silas said. The judge is reviewing their motion in chambers right now. If I cannot prove that you were exonerated, he is going to sign it. He has to. He can't risk letting a potential bioterrorist into a government building. I need an affidavit, I said, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I need Agent Harrow to go on record. I can't call him, Silas said. I am in the courtroom. No phones allowed once the session starts. You have to get it. Elara. And you have to get it to the clerk's digital inbox before the judge takes the bench. Send me the clerk's email address, I said. Now. A ping. The address appeared on my screen. Clerk, Division 4 at Blackwood Courts, Gov. I switched tabs. I typed in the number Agent Harrow had given me. It wasn't a phone number. It was a secure text line for witnesses. Agent Harrow, this is Alara Vance. My parents are using the arrest record to bar me from the courthouse. They are claiming I am still a threat. I need you to send a formal statement to the court clerk immediately confirming that the substance was flour and the tip was a false report initiated by the Vances. If you do not do this, their fraud succeeds. I hit send. The loading circle spun and spun. Come on, I whispered. Come on. The satellite signal was weak. The plane banked hard to the left. Navigating around a thunderhead, the laptop slid across my knees. I grabbed it. Message failed. Try. Damn it, I hit retry. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom system, which was really just him shouting through a headset. We have heavy turbulence ahead. Going to have to drop altitude to find smoother air. Signal might cut out. No, I screamed. Do not drop altitude. I need the signal. I am not crashing my plane for your Wi-Fi, Ideti. The nose of the plane dipped. We descended into the cloud layer. The gray mist swallowed us. Outside the window, I couldn't see the wingtip. The vibration got worse. The boxes of circuit boards groaned against their straps. I looked at the screen. No connection. I was trapped in a metal tube, 20,000 feet in the air, flying blind into a legal ambush. My parents had timed this perfectly. They knew the gap between the arrest and the exoneration was where the damage lived. They were exploiting the lag time of the bureaucracy. I needed to get back online. I unbuckled my strap. Sit down, the pilot yelled, looking over his shoulder. I ignored him. I stood up, bracing myself against the fuselage ribs as the plane bucked like a wild horse. I held the laptop up high, near the ceiling of the cargo hold, trying to get closer to the receiver antenna. Connect, I hissed. Connect. 1 bar. I hit retry on the text to Harrow. Sent. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Now I just had to wait for him to see it, and for him to care enough to act. My laptop pinged. Incoming email. It wasn't from Harrow. It was from the court automated system. Silas must have copied me on the filing notification. Motion to preclude attendance and appoint emergency guardian. Petitioner Marcus Vance. Exhibit A Airport Police Incident Report. Number 89220-B. I opened the attachment. It was blurry on the slow connection, but I could read the bold text. Suspect detained. Hazmat protocol initiated. Threat level high. It looked damning. If I were a judge, sitting in a safe, quiet office, reading this report, I would lock the doors too. I would sign the order to hand the estate over to the concerned parents, who were only trying to help their troubled daughter. I typed a new email, addressed to the clerk. Subject urgent. False evidence. Estate of Sterling. To the Honorable Court. I am Alara Vance. I am currently in transit on a cargo aircraft to the hearing. The motion filed by the petitioners relies on a police report that has already been invalidated. I was the victim of a swatting incident orchestrated by the petitioners. I was released without charge. The substance found was baking flour planted by Beatrice Vance. I am attaching the video file from my dashcam showing the planting of evidence. I clicked Attach File. The dashcam video was 400 megabytes. The upload bar appeared. Estimated time remaining 2 hours, 15 minutes. I stared at the number. 2 hours. The hearing was in 90 minutes. The satellite connection was too slow. I couldn't upload the video. I couldn't send the smoking gun. Can we go higher? I shouted to the pilot. I need better bandwidth. We are icing up, he yelled back. We stay low or we fall out of the sky. I slumped back onto the crate. I couldn't send the video. My words in an email were just words, the ramblings of a desperate woman against the official-looking police report my parents had submitted. Without the video, or Harrow's affidavit, I was just noise. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Harrow. I got your message. I'm calling the clerk directly. But Alara, You should know your parents' lawyer just tried to quash my testimony. They are claiming FBI interference in a civil matter. I typed back, "Did the judge listen to them?" 3 dots. The signal wavered. The plane shook violently, a crate breaking loose from its strap and sliding across the floor, slamming into the wall inches from my leg. I didn't move. I stared at the 3 dots. The text came through. "The judge is taking it under advisement. He's delaying the ruling until the hearing starts. But if you aren't there when he calls the docket, he's going to rule on the papers he has. And right now, the papers say you're a terrorist." "How far out are we?" I screamed at the pilot. 50 miles, he shouted. "But the headwind is killing our ground speed. We are looking at landing in 45 minutes. 45 minutes to land. Then I had to find a car. Then I had to drive to the courthouse. It was going to be down to the second. I looked at the silver briefcase strapped next to me. Inside was the paper trail of a lifetime. The medical records. The original will. The proof that Arthur Sterling loved me and trusted me. But paper is heavy, and digital proof was too slow. I realized then that this wasn't just a race against time. It was a race against the narrative. My parents were telling a story of fear and safety. I had to tell a story of truth. I closed the laptop. I wouldn't win this in the cloud. I had to win it in the room. "Land this thing," I said to the empty air. "Just get me on the ground." The pilot banked the plane again, lining up for an approach into the valley that was completely invisible through the storm. I gripped the cargo netting until my knuckles turned white. This wasn't just a flight. It was the final descent into the war zone. The Cessna Caravan bucked through the cloud layer like a stone skipping on rough water. I was still gripping the cargo netting, my knuckles white. Staring at my phone, it was my lifeline, my only connection to Silas Thorne, to Agent Harrow, to the courtroom where my future was being dismantled. Then, the screen went black. Not the sleep mode black, the hard reset black. I tapped the screen. Nothing. I held the power button. A white Apple logo appeared, followed by a progress bar I had never invoked. "Restoring factory settings." "No," I whispered. "No, no, no." I watched, helpless, as the progress bar raced forward, my contacts, my emails, the recording of my father threatening me, the dashcam footage I had synced to the local storage. All of it was being scrubbed in real time. It was Marcus. I had forgotten the most basic rule of escaping a tech mogul: never use the device he pays for. My phone plan was still part of the Vance Family Trust bundle. He had administrator privileges. He didn't just cut my service, he had initiated a remote wipe. He was digitally lobotomizing me from 300 miles away. "You bastard," I hissed at the blank screen. I was now completely dark. I couldn't call Silas to tell him I was close. I couldn't check the court docket. I was flying blind in a cargo plane with no way to navigate the legal storm waiting for me. I looked at the silver Halliburton case strapped next to me. Inside was the ThinkPad, my grandfather's laptop. It was old, clunky, and air-gapped. It had no SIM card, no cellular chip. It was invisible to Marcus Vance. I cracked the case open and pulled the heavy black brick of a computer onto my lap. I booted it up. The familiar hum of the fan was comforting. But a computer without a connection was just a typewriter. I needed the internet. "Pilot," I shouted over the engine roar, "what is the Wi-Fi password for the satellite uplink?" "There is no password," he yelled back. "It's an open network for the avionics, but you can't connect to it. It's encrypted for the flight systems." "Watch me," I muttered. I opened the command terminal. The ThinkPad ran a custom Linux distribution Arthur had installed years ago. He was paranoid, but he was brilliant. He had loaded this machine with packet sniffers and decryption tools. "Just in case the government tries to read my diary," he used to say. I scanned for networks. N-number logistics link, that was the plane. I started a brute force attack on the handshake protocol. It wasn't elegant hacking. It was digital lockpicking. The script ran. Lines of green code cascading down the screen. Attempt 450. Failed. Attempt 451. Failed. The plane dropped again, my stomach lurching into my throat. Outside, The gray soup of the storm was breaking. I could see flashes of green ground below. We were getting lower. Attempt 502. Success. Connection established. I was in. I routed my traffic through 3 proxy servers in Estonia and Singapore, creating a digital tunnel that Marcus couldn't trace and definitely couldn't wipe. I opened a browser. The first thing I did wasn't check my email. I checked the news. I typed Alara Vance into the search bar. The results made me nauseous. Trending Silicon Valley heiress detained at Liberty Airport. Live Marcus and Beatrice Vance speak out on daughter's crisis. There was a live stream link. It was active. Viewers 1.2 million. I clicked it. The video was shaky, filmed on a phone outside the Blackwood County Courthouse. My mother, Beatrice, was clinging to my father's arm. She was wearing oversized sunglasses and dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue. Marcus looked grave, the weight of the world on his shoulders. "We just want her to be safe," Marcus was saying to a reporter. "Alara has been struggling since her grandfather passed. The episode at the airport this morning. The biological threat. It's a cry for help. We aren't angry. We just want to get her into treatment before she hurts herself or someone else." "Are you seeking conservatorship?" the reporter asked. "We have to," Beatrice sobbed. "For her own good. She's not capable of managing herself right now. She's lost touch with reality." The comments section was scrolling so fast it was a blur. Rich kid syndrome, lock her up. Imagine being that privileged and still a terrorist. Poor parents. They looked devastated. They were winning the court of public opinion. By the time I walked into that room, the jury pool of the world would already hate me. But judges aren't supposed to watch live streams. I closed the tab. I couldn't let the hate get to me. I had to focus on the one person whose opinion mattered, the Honorable Judge Garrison. I opened a secure email client. I couldn't use my normal address. Marcus probably had that monitored too. I created a burner account. To clerk, Division 4 at Blackwood Courts, Gov. Subject emergency evidence. Vance guardianship hearing. Honorable Judge Garrison. My name is Alara Vance. I am writing to you from a secure, encrypted terminal. My personal devices have been remotely wiped by the petitioner, Marcus Vance. In an attempt to destroy evidence and prevent communication with the court, this action constitutes spoliation of evidence and witness tampering. Attached is the audio file of Agent Harrow, FBI, confirming that the report filed against me this morning was false and retaliatory. I didn't have the dashcam video that was on the wiped phone, but I had the recording of Harrow from the interrogation room. I had backed it up to the ThinkPad's local drive the moment I connected it in the interrogation room. Arthur's paranoia had saved me again. Always back up locally. I attached the file. Harrow_interrogation_clearance, wave. Send. The progress bar moved. The satellite connection held. Message sent. I sat back, exhaling a breath that shook. It was there. It was in the system. Unless Marcus could hack the county court servers in the next 30 minutes. The judge would see it. The pitch of the engine changed. The roar dropped to a whine. The flaps extended with a mechanical groan. "Ta-ba! Touchdown in 5 minutes," the pilot yelled. "Brace yourself." I packed the laptop away. I locked the Halliburton case. My hands were trembling. Not from fear, but from the adrenaline crash. I was fighting a war on 3 fronts: the physical distance, the legal system, and the digital narrative. The wheels hit the runway with a violent screech. The plane bounced, settled, and braked hard. I was thrown forward against the cargo netting. We taxied to a halt near a rusted hangar. This wasn't the main airport. It was a secondary airfield, mostly used for crop dusters and cargo drops. There was no terminal, no taxi stand, just a chain-link fence and a small office building. The pilot cut the engine. He climbed out of the cockpit and opened the cargo door. The cool, damp air of the valley rushed in. It was raining here. I jumped down onto the wet tarmac. "Thanks for the ride," I said. "The crypto transfer should have cleared." "It did," the pilot said, checking his phone. He looked at me with a strange expression. "You're the girl, aren't you? The one on the news?" I froze. I am Alara Vance. He spat on the ground. News says you're a terrorist. Says you tried to bomb the airport. The news is lying, I said. My parents own the news. He looked at me, then at the silver case. He was a veteran. I could tell by the fading tattoo on his forearm and the way he stood. He knew what it looked like when authority figures lied. I need a car, I said. I can't rent one. My cards are frozen. Uber, he suggested. No app, I said, holding up my bricked phone. My father wiped it. He looked at the phone, then back at me. He squinted against the rain. Where are you going? County courthouse, I said. To stop them from stealing my grandfather's legacy. He hesitated. He rubbed the back of his neck. My truck is out back, he said gruffly. 85 Ford. It's ugly, but it runs. I will buy it from you, I said. 5,000, right now. I don't want your crypto money for the truck, he said. I want it back by tonight. You borrow it. He dug into his pocket and tossed me a set of keys. It's the blue one with the dented bumper. Don't wreck it, and don't blow anything up. I promise, I said, catching the keys. Thank you. Get going, he said, turning back to his plane. You got 40 minutes before the storm really hits. I ran to the back of the hangar. The truck was there, a rusted blue beast that looked like it had survived 3 wars. I threw my case on the passenger seat and climbed in. The engine roared to life with a cloud of black smoke. I shifted into gear and peeled out of the gravel lot, hitting the county road fast. The wipers slapped against the windshield, struggling to clear the mud and rain. 45 minutes to the courthouse. The roads were slick. My parents had an army of lawyers, a PR team, and the sympathy of the nation. I had a rusted truck, a bricked phone, and the truth. I floored the accelerator. The windshield wipers of the 85 Ford pickup were not fighting the rain. They were surrendering to it. The storm had turned the sky into a bruised charcoal ceiling that sat low over the valley, dumping water with a violence that felt personal. I was gripping the steering wheel so hard my hands were cramping, fighting the play in the old suspension as I pushed the speedometer past 70 miles per hour. The truck rattled like a tin can full of bolts, smelling of wet dog and burning oil, but it was moving. I checked the rearview mirror again. The headlights were still there. They had appeared 3 miles back, just as I turned onto Route 9, the winding 2-lane highway that snaked through the Blackwood foothills. It was a black SUV, modern and aggressive, with tinted windows and a grille guard that looked like it was designed to breach fortress walls. It wasn't the police. There were no lights, no sirens, just a relentless, predatory proximity. I knew who they were, Viper Security. My father didn't trust the police to finish a job. Police were bound by jurisdiction and paperwork. Viper Security was a private contractor that specialized in high-risk executive protection, which was corporate speak for intimidation and physical removal. Marcus Vance paid them a retainer of $20,000 a month to keep paparazzi away from the estate and to handle sensitive family matters. Today, I was the sensitive matter. The SUV surged forward, closing the gap to less than 5 feet. I could see the silhouette of the driver and a passenger. They weren't trying to pass. They were drafting me, pushing me. You want to play, I whispered, my voice shaking with the vibration of the cab. Let's play. I knew their orders. They wouldn't ram me off a cliff. That would be murder. And Marcus Vance didn't do murder. He did liability management. If I died, the estate became a crime scene. No, their goal was simpler. They wanted to tap my bumper, spin me out into a ditch, or force me to pull over. They wanted a fender bender. They wanted to exchange insurance information. They wanted to keep me on the side of the road for 45 minutes until the gavel dropped in courtroom 4. They wanted to delay me. The SUV lunged again, tapping the rear bumper of the truck. The impact jolted my spine. The heavy steel frame of the Ford absorbed it, but the back tires lost traction for a terrifying second on the wet asphalt. I steered into the skid, correcting with a reflex that didn't belong to a data analyst. It belonged to the 12-year-old girl who used to sit on Arthur Sterling's lap in his old Jeep, learning how to drive these exact roads. Brake late, Alara, Apex early, trust the wait. Arthur's voice was in my head, clearer than the rain hammering the roof. We were approaching Dead Man's Curve, a hairpin turn that wrapped around the edge of the gorge. The speed limit sign said 25 miles per hour. I was doing 60. The SUV pulled into the opposing lane, pulling alongside me. They were trying to box me in, to force me toward the guardrail. I looked to my left. The passenger window of the SUV rolled down. A man in a tactical vest looked at me. He didn't wave a gun. He just pointed to the side of the road, his face stone cold. Pull over. I looked straight ahead. Not today. I didn't brake. I punched the gas. The old V8 engine roared, a guttural cough of raw power. The truck surged forward, surprising the SUV driver. I cut the wheel hard to the left, slamming the side of the pickup into the sleek black door of the SUV. Crunch. Metal screamed. Sparks flew. It was brute force against aerodynamic plastic. The Ford was built like a tank. The SUV was built like a luxury lounge. The impact sent the SUV wobbling toward the center line. The driver overcorrected, braking hard to avoid spinning out on the slick pavement. I gained 50 yards. But they had more horsepower. They recovered instantly, the engine of the SUV whining as they accelerated back onto my tail. They were angry now. The next hit wouldn't be a tap. I looked at the odometer, 2 miles to the turnoff for the logging road. It was a gamble. The logging road was a fire trail that cut through the pine forest and connected directly to the back of the county municipal district. It shaved 4 miles off the route, but it wasn't paved. It was mud, gravel, and roots. In this rain, it would be a river of sludge. The SUV hit me again, harder this time. My head snapped back against the headrest. The truck fishtailed wildly. I saw the guardrail looming on my right. Beyond it, a 300-foot drop into the river. Steady, I hissed. Steady. I saw the marker, a split oak tree with a faded orange ribbon, the entrance to the trail. I didn't signal. I waited until the last possible second, until the SUV was right on my bumper, committing to the curve. Then I stomped on the brake with both feet and yanked the wheel to the right. The truck drifted, sliding sideways through the mud of the shoulder, and slammed onto the dirt track. The SUV couldn't make the turn. Their momentum carried them past the entrance. I saw their brake lights flare red as they skidded past, tires smoking on the wet asphalt. They would have to reverse, turn around, and follow. I had bought myself 30 seconds. But the victory was short-lived. The logging road was a nightmare. The truck bounced violently, bottoming out in craters filled with brown water. My head hit the roof of the cab. The silver Halliburton case was thrown into the footwell. I fought the steering wheel, wrestling the heavy beast of a truck through the slurry. Mud sprayed up over the windshield, blinding me. I kept my foot on the gas. I couldn't stop. If I stopped, the mud would swallow the tires and I would never get out. Boom. It sounded like a gunshot. The steering wheel jerked out of my hands. The front right corner of the truck collapsed. I slammed on the brakes, sliding for 20 feet before the truck slammed into a pine tree with a bone-jarring thud. Steam hissed from the radiator. I sat there for a second, gasping for air, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked out the window. The front right tire was shredded. The rim bent into a useless oval. I had hit a hidden rock. The truck was dead. I checked my watch, 9:35. I was 2 miles from the courthouse. I looked back down the trail. Through the trees, I could see the headlights of the SUV turning onto the dirt road. They were coming. I grabbed the silver case. I kicked the door open. The rain hit me like a physical weight. It was cold, freezing cold. It soaked my blazer in seconds, plastering the silk blouse to my skin. I didn't care. I hoisted the briefcase, clutching it to my chest, and scrambled up the embankment into the dense tree line. I couldn't stay on the road. They would run me down. I had to go through the woods. I ran. The ground was a slurry of pine needles and mud. My loafers, expensive Italian leather designed for boardrooms, slipped on the first step. I fell hard, landing on my hip, Mud coated the side of my face. I scrambled up, spitting dirt. One shoe was gone, sucked into the muck. I kicked the other one off. I ran in my stocking feet. The forest was dark, the canopy blocking the little light that remained in the sky. Branches whipped my face, leaving stinging scratches. Briars tore at my clothes. I could hear the engine of the SUV behind me, revving as it navigated the mud. But then the sound stopped. They had found the truck. Now they would be on foot too. I reached into the side pocket of the briefcase as I ran, pulling out a small digital dictaphone part of the legal prep kit Silas had told me to bring. Since my phone was a brick, this was my black box. I hit the record button. The red light blinked on. I held it to my lips, my breath coming in ragged, sobbing gasps as I forced my legs to move. "My name is Alara Vance," I panted into the microphone, the sound of rain and breaking twigs filling the background. "It is 9:40 a.m. I have been run off the road by agents I believe were hired by Marcus Vance. My vehicle was disabled on the North Fire Trail. I scrambled over a fallen log, sliding down a ravine. Pain shot through my foot as I stepped on a sharp rock, but I didn't stop. "I am proceeding on foot to the courthouse," I recorded, my voice breaking but fierce. "If I do not arrive, or if I am found injured, this recording is evidence of intent. They are trying to physically prevent me from attending the hearing. They are trying to steal the estate by default." I could hear shouting behind me. Deep voices. "Fan out. She couldn't have gone far." They were tracking me. I pushed harder. My lungs burned. My legs felt like lead. The silver briefcase, usually just a few pounds, felt like it weighed 50. But I couldn't drop it. It was the shield. It was the sword. I saw a break in the trees, the gray stone wall of the county district perimeter. I sprinted the last 100 yards, bursting out of the tree line and onto the manicured lawn of the courthouse park. I must have looked like a monster, covered in mud from head to toe, hair wild and matted with leaves, barefoot, bleeding, clutching a metal case like a lunatic. A woman walking her dog screamed and pulled her pet away. I didn't look at her. I looked at the clock tower on the front of the courthouse. 9:55. The hearing started in 5 minutes. I limped across the asphalt parking lot, ignoring the sharp gravel digging into my feet. I saw the Viper security SUV skidding out of the side exit of the woods, tires spinning on the grass. They had tried to cut me off at the exit. The passenger door flew open. The man in the vest jumped out. "Ms. Vance," he shouted. "Stop. We just want to talk." I didn't stop. I ran up the marble stairs of the courthouse, leaving muddy, bloody footprints on the pristine stone. The 2 sheriff's deputies at the metal detector looked up, their eyes widening. One moved his hand to his taser. "Ma'am," the deputy barked. "Halt!" I slammed the briefcase onto the conveyor belt. I raised my hands, shaking, dripping with rain and mud. "My name is Alara Vance," I gasped, my voice echoing in the cavernous lobby. "I am the heir to the Sterling estate. I have a hearing in courtroom 4. I looked back through the glass doors. The Viper security guards had stopped at the bottom of the stairs. They couldn't come in. Not with weapons. Not without exposing themselves. They stood there, watching me, their faces twisted in frustration. I turned back to the deputy, wiping mud from my eyes. "And I am not late," I said. "I have 5 minutes." I stood for 1 second outside the heavy oak double doors of courtroom 4. My chest was heaving, my lungs burning with the metallic taste of adrenaline and exhaustion. But I forced myself to stop. I needed to breathe. I needed to listen. Through the thick wood, the muffled acoustics of the legal chamber filtered out. It was a theater, and the performance was already in the 3rd act. I heard the smooth baritone voice of Leonard Vane, my parents' lead attorney. He sounded like poured velvet, rich and heavy with manufactured gravitas. "Your Honor," Vane was saying, "this is not a motion we file lightly. It is a tragedy. The petitioners, Marcus and Beatrice Vance, are not here to seize assets. They are here to catch a falling child. The incident at Liberty International this morning, the hazmat response, the federal detention, The attempt to board a plane with what authorities believed was a biological weapon, it paints a picture of a young woman in a catastrophic mental decline. I pushed a lock of wet, mud-caked hair out of my eyes. Catastrophic mental decline. They were reading from the script perfectly. "We are asking," Vane continued, his voice dropping to a whisper that was meant to carry to the back of the room, "that the court invoke the unworthy heir statute, not to punish Alara, but to protect the estate from her volatility. A person who threatens national security cannot be entrusted with the sterling legacy." I heard a sniffle. It was a delicate, practice sound. My mother, she was crying on cue. "Mr. Thorne." A new voice spoke, deep, authoritative. "Judge Garrison, your client is not present. The allegations are serious. Do you have any evidence to contradict the airport police report submitted by the petitioners?" Silas Thorne's voice was thinner, strained. "Your Honor, I have been in contact with Ms. Vance. She claims the report is false. She is en route. I ask for a short recess. 30 minutes. "We have waited 30 minutes, Your Honor." Vane interrupted, his tone sharp. "Every minute we wait is a minute the estate remains in limbo, vulnerable to her erratic behavior. She is not coming. She is likely in federal custody or undergoing psychiatric evaluation. We need to proceed." I looked down at my feet. My stocking feet were shredded, bleeding slightly onto the marble floor. My suit, a $2,000 Italian wool blazer, was ruined. Soaked in swamp water and caked with red clay, I smelled like a wet dog in fear. Perfect. If they wanted a monster, I would give them a monster, but I would be the kind of monster that ate liars. I placed both hands on the brass handles of the double doors. I didn't open them gently. I threw my weight against them, shoving them inward with every ounce of strength I had left. The doors boom open, slamming against the magnetic stops with a thunderous crack that echoed like a gunshot in the high-ceilinged room. The silence that followed was absolute. Every head in the courtroom snapped toward the entrance. The court reporter stopped typing. The bailiff's hand dropped to his belt. Judge Garrison, who had been looking down at a file, looked up over his reading glasses, his expression shifting from irritation to shock. I stood in the doorway, a silhouette of disaster against the bright lights of the hallway. I dripped water onto the parquet floor. I was trembling, not from cold, but from a rage so pure it felt like a white flame in my chest. I saw the tableau of my enemies. Marcus and Beatrice sat at the plaintiff's table. They were dressed in somber, expensive black, looking like the grieving pillars of the community. When they saw me, the masks slipped, just for a microsecond. I saw the color drain from Marcus's face. His jaw went slack. He looked at me like he was seeing a ghost, or a zombie crawling out of the grave he had just finished digging. He had spent thousands of dollars, hired private mercenaries, and weaponized the FBI to keep me out of this room. And yet, here I was. Beatrice's eyes went wide behind her oversized designer glasses. Her hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp that wasn't acting this time. "Ms. Vance?" Judge Garrison asked, his voice breaking the stunned silence. I took a step forward. The squelch of my wet feet on the floor was audible. "I am here, Your Honor," I said. My voice was raspy, throat raw from the run, but it carried. "I am Alara Vance, and I object." Leonard Vane recovered first. He was a professional. He stood up, buttoning his suit jacket, positioning himself between me and the judge like a shield. "Your Honor," Vane said, his voice dripping with alarm. "Please, look at her. This is exactly what we were describing. She is manic. She is disheveled. She is clearly in the midst of a psychotic break. Bailiff, please secure the room." The bailiff took a step toward me. "Do not touch me," I snapped. I didn't scream it. I commanded it. The bailiff hesitated. "I am not manic," I said, limping down the center aisle. I left a trail of muddy footprints on the carpet. "I am the victim of a coordinated assault." Beatrice moved then. She jumped up from her chair, her face contorting into a mask of desperate, maternal panic. "Alara!" she cried out, rushing toward me with her arms open. "Oh, my poor baby. Look at you. You're hurt. You're confused." She was coming to hug me. It was a brilliant tactical move. If she hugged me, she could physically restrain me. She could whisper threats in my ear. She could drag me out of the courtroom under the guise of comforting her sick daughter. "Let's get you cleaned up. Sweetie, let's go to the hospital." I stopped walking. I stood my ground. When she was 3 feet away, I raised my hand, palm out. "Stop," I said. Beatrice froze. She blinked, tears shimmering in her eyes. "Elara, please, Mommy is here. We just want to help you." "Do not touch me," I repeated, my voice cold enough to freeze the air in the room. "You lost the right to touch me when you hired Viper Security to run my truck off the road 2 miles from here." Beatrice flinched as if I had slapped her. She looked at the judge, eyes wide. "Your Honor, she's hallucinating Viper Security. We don't know what she's talking about." "Take your seat, Mrs. Vance," Judge Garrison said. His voice was sharp. He wasn't looking at Beatrice. He was looking at me. "Ms. Vance, approach the bench. Mr. Thorne, accompany your client." Silas Thorne practically leaped from his chair. He rushed to my side, offering me his arm. He looked horrified by my appearance, but underneath the shock, I saw immense relief. "My God, Elara," he whispered. "Are you okay?" "I am fine," I whispered back. "Give me the floor." We stood before the bench. I was flanked by my parents on one side and the empty jury box on the other. I gripped the edge of the wooden podium to keep my legs from collapsing. "Ms. Vance," Judge Garrison said, peering down at me, "you are 2 hours late. You are covered in mud, and your parents have filed a motion claiming you were arrested for terrorism this morning. I need an explanation, and it had better be good." "It is not good, Your Honor," I said. "It is criminal." Leonard Vane interjected smoothly. "Your Honor, we object to any testimony given in this state. The heir is clearly incompetent. We request an immediate recess for a psychological evaluation." "Denied," Garrison said without looking at him. "She is here. She has a right to speak. Go on. Ms. Vance." I took a deep breath. I looked at Marcus. He was staring at the table, refusing to meet my eyes. He knew that if I was here, his men had failed. "I apologize for my appearance," I began, keeping my tone level, fighting the urge to shake. "I was detained at Liberty International Airport at 7 o'clock this morning based on a false report filed by a caller using a burner phone located at my parents' residence." "Objection," Vane shouted. "Hearsay speculation." "I am not speculating," I said, cutting him off. "I was released by the FBI at 8:30. My flight was then canceled by a person impersonating me, a person who knew my security questions. Information only my parents possess. When I chartered a cargo plane to get here, my phone was remotely wiped to destroy the evidence I had gathered." The courtroom murmured. Vane laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "Remote wipes cargo planes." Vane shook his head, looking at the judge with a pitying smile. "Your Honor, this is a spy novel. This is a delusion. She believes her parents are supervillains. This is textbook paranoia." "And the mud?" Judge Garrison asked, gesturing to my ruined clothes. "Is that a delusion?" "I assume she fell," Vane said dismissively. "Or perhaps she wandered through the woods in her confused state." "I did not wander," I said. "I was forced off the road on Route 9 by a black SUV with reinforced bumpers. I was pursued through the forest. That is why I am muddy. That is why I am bleeding." Judge Garrison looked at me. He looked skeptical. I couldn't blame him. It sounded insane. It sounded exactly like the story a paranoid schizophrenic would invent to explain why they were late. "Ms. Vance," the judge said gently, "these are grave accusations. You are accusing the petitioners, your own parents, of federal crimes and assault. Do you have any proof?" "A police report? A witness?" "I have no police report," I admitted, "because the FBI agent who released me is currently fighting your clerk's firewall to send his affidavit, and I have no phone, because it was destroyed." Vane spread his hands wide. "No proof, just stories, Your Honor. We move to grant the guardianship. Look at her. We cannot let this proceed." I reached into the soaking wet pocket of my blazer. My fingers closed around the small, hard shape of the USB drive wrapped in a sandwich bag I had begged from the pilot. "I do not have my phone," I said, my voice rising. "But I have this." I pulled the plastic bag out. I held it up like a holy relic. "This," I said, "is a backup drive. It contains the dashcam footage from my car this morning. It shows my mother, Beatrice Vance, planting the fake evidence in my luggage at the airport terminal." Beatrice stopped crying instantly. Her face went from tragic to terrified in a single frame. "It also contains," I continued, turning to look straight at Marcus, "the audio recording of the threats my father made against me last night, and most importantly, it contains a video file from my grandfather, Arthur Sterling, filmed 3 days before he died." The room went dead silent. "Mr. Vane says I am paranoid," I said, placing the plastic bag on the judge's bench. "He says I am imagining a conspiracy, but my grandfather imagined it first. He predicted this day. He predicted the airport. He predicted the accusations of insanity, and he left a testimony to be played in this courtroom in the event that I arrived, compromised." I looked down at my muddy clothes. "I believe I am sufficiently compromised, Your Honor." Judge Garrison looked at the plastic bag. He looked at Vane, whose velvet composure was starting to fray at the edges. "Mr. Thorne," the judge said, "do you have the hardware to play this exhibit?" "I do, Your Honor," Silas said, opening his laptop, "and the court has a projector." "Play it," Garrison ordered. "Your Honor," Vane protested, his voice losing its smooth timbre, "this is highly irregular. That drive has not been authenticated. It comes from a compromised source. We cannot just watch home movies." Judge Garrison slammed his gavel down. The sound made Beatrice jump. "This is a probate court, Mr. Vane, not a criminal trial. I have broad discretion to review evidence regarding the intent of the deceased. And frankly, given that the heir looks like she just crawled out of a swamp to get here, I am inclined to hear what she has to say. Sit down." Vane sat down. He looked at Marcus. Marcus was staring at the USB drive as if it were a live grenade. And in a way, it was. Silas took the drive from the judge. He plugged it into his computer. He connected the HDMI cable. The large screen on the wall flickered to life. "Ready?" Silas asked me. "Play it," I said. The screen went blue, then resolved into an image. It was Arthur Sterling. He was sitting in his study, wearing his favorite cardigan. He looked frail, but his eyes were sharp, blue, and fierce. He looked directly into the camera. "My name is Arthur Sterling," the video voice said, filling the courtroom. "And if you are watching this, it means I am dead, and more importantly, it means my son, Marcus, has tried to stop Alara from taking her seat at the table." I watched my father flinch. I stood there, shivering in my wet clothes, the mud drying on my skin, and for the first time that day, I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of the person who held the detonator. "Let the show begin," I whispered. Judge Garrison leaned back in his leather chair, the wood creaking in the silence of the courtroom. He looked at the plastic bag containing the USB drive, then at me, then at the frantic, sweating faces of my parents. He didn't look like a man who was buying their story anymore. He looked like a man who was tired of having his courtroom treated like a stage for bad amateur theater. "Mr. Thorne," the judge said, his voice level, "connect the drive." Silas nodded, his hands moving efficiently over the laptop. The projector hummed, a beam of blue light cutting through the dust motes in the air, illuminating the white screen behind the judge's bench. Leonard Vane stood up, desperate. "Your Honor, I must object again. The chain of custody on that digital evidence is—" "Mr. Vane," Garrison cut him off without looking up. "If the evidence is fabricated, it will be obvious. If it is not, then your clients have committed perjury in my court. I suggest you sit down and watch." Vane sat. He whispered something to Marcus, who was wiping his forehead with a handkerchief that cost more than my first car. "File 1, I said, my voice raspy but steady. "Labeled Terminal Security Feed." Silas clicked the file. The screen flickered, then resolved into a high-definition black-and-white view of the Liberty International Airport lobby. The timestamp in the corner read 5:46 a.m. It was the official security angle, sent to my encrypted email by Agent Harrow just before I boarded the cargo plane, the one piece of data I had managed to download to the local drive before the signal died. The angle was high and wide, but clear. It showed me standing at the coffee kiosk, and it showed a woman in a camel hair coat and oversized sunglasses approaching my unattended bag. "Pause," I said. Silas hit the spacebar. I pointed a muddy finger at the screen. "That is the defendant, Beatrice Vance." "That could be anyone," Beatrice cried out, though her voice was an octave too high. "It's a common coat." "Play," I said. The video rolled forward. The woman in the coat didn't just walk by. She stopped. She looked left, then right, and then, with a movement that was too practiced to be accidental, she slid a white packet from her sleeve and tucked it under the lining of my silver Halliburton case. She patted the case once, then walked away. The courtroom was silent. "Mr. Thorne," Judge Garrison said, squinting at the screen. "Zoom in on the timestamp and the subject's face." Silas obliged, even with the sunglasses. The profile was undeniable, but what was more damning was the bracelet on her wrist, a distinctive, heavy gold cuff with emerald insets. I looked at Beatrice's wrist, currently resting on the defense table. She saw me looking. She instinctively pulled her sleeve down, covering the gold cuff she was wearing right now. "Let the record show," I said, "that Mrs. Vance is wearing the same jewelry in this courtroom that the perpetrator is wearing in the video." The judge looked at Beatrice's wrist. He didn't say a word, but his expression hardened into granite. "File 2, I said, labeled Airline Cancellation Audio. "This was recorded by the airline's customer service center," I explained to the room. "The file includes the metadata of the caller." Silas clicked play. A voice filled the room. It was my voice, or rather, a digital approximation of it. It was smooth, devoid of breath, the uncanny valley of an AI voice clone. "This is Alara Vance. Confirmation code Delta 9 X-ray. I am having a mental health crisis. I am not safe to fly. Please cancel my ticket immediately and flag my profile." It sounded like me, but wrong. The cadence was too perfect. "That is an AI-generated voice profile," I said. "My father, Marcus Vance, owns a controlling interest in Aura Tech, a company specializing in voice synthesis. But here's the interesting part." I nodded to Silas. He pulled up the metadata attached to the file. "The call originated from a VoIP line," I read from the screen. "IP address 192.168.1.104, registered to VTech Ventures, residential node." I turned to Marcus. "That is the Wi-Fi at your house, Dad," I said. "You didn't even bother to use a VPN. You were so arrogant, so sure I would never make it here to challenge you, that you used your own home internet to frame me." Marcus went pale. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. "File 3, I said. "The FBI Incident Report." This was the document Agent Harrow had finally managed to push through to the clerk's secure server. Silas opened the PDF. It was redacted in places, but the conclusion was highlighted in yellow. Subject cleared of all threats. Substance identified as benign flower. Incident classified as swatting. A false report intended to provoke law enforcement response. Investigation opened into the reporting party. I turned to the judge. "They filed a police report saying I was a terrorist," I said, my voice trembling with the sheer weight of the betrayal. "They planted fake anthrax in my luggage. They canceled my flight. They ran my truck off the road. All to ensure that when you called my name at 10 o'clock, I would not be here to answer." I gripped the podium. "They did not do this because they are worried about my mental health. Your Honor, they did this because of what is in the fourth file." Judge Garrison looked at the parents. Marcus was staring at the table. Beatrice was weeping into her hands. But it wasn't the performance of a grieving mother anymore. It was the terrified sobbing of a woman who sees the prison bars closing in. "Mr. Vane," the judge said, his voice dangerous. "Do you have any defense for what we have just seen? Because from where I am sitting, it looks like your clients have committed perjury, obstruction of justice, and federal wire fraud in the last 10 minutes. Vane stood up slowly. He looked at his clients with open disgust. "Your Honor, I was not made aware of these actions. If these exhibits are authentic, I must request to withdraw as counsel immediately." "Sit down. Mr. Vane," Garrison barked. "You are not going anywhere until we finish this. Miss Vance, play the fourth file." "This file," I said, "is why we are all here. My parents told you that my grandfather, Arthur Sterling, was senile when he changed his will. They told you he was manipulated by me. They told you he didn't know what he was doing." I looked at the screen. Arthur Sterling knew exactly what he was doing. Silas clicked the final video. The face of my grandfather filled the wall. He was sitting in his leather armchair, the one that smelled of pipe tobacco and old paper. He looked directly into the lens, his blue eyes sharp and lucid. "My name is Arthur Sterling." The video Arthur said, "Today is January 15th. I am of sound mind and body. I am recording this video as a supplement to my last will and testament." The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the hard drive. "I have left the bulk of my estate to my granddaughter, Elara Vance," Arthur continued. "Not because I do not love my son, Marcus, but because I know him. I know his greed, and I know his wife's ambition." On the video, Arthur leaned forward. It felt like he was looking right at Marcus in the courtroom. "I am aware," Arthur said, "that Marcus and Beatrice will try to challenge this will. They will claim I am senile. They will claim Elara is incompetent. They will use their money and their lawyers to bury her." Arthur paused, a dry, knowing smile touching his lips. "I predict," he said, "that they will try to physically prevent her from attending the probate hearing. They will use the police. They will use the airlines. They will use every dirty trick in the book to make sure she isn't in the room when the gavel falls." A gasp went through the courtroom. It was ghostly. He had predicted the morning's events with the precision of a prophet. "So," Arthur said, leaning back, "I have included a special clause in my trust. My lawyer, Silas Thorne, calls it the poison pill. I call it the boomerang." I saw Marcus's head snap up. He didn't know about this. The copy of the will they had seen was the redacted version. "If," Arthur said, his voice hardening, "if there is any evidence at all that Marcus or Beatrice Vance have attempted to obstruct, delay, or interfere with Elara's assumption of the estate, then they are not only disinherited from the current assets." Arthur held up a finger. "The clause stipulates that if interference is proven, the Vance Family Trust, which I funded 20 years ago, is immediately dissolved, and all funds distributed to Marcus and Beatrice over the last 2 decades must be repaid to the estate in full, with interest." The color drained from Marcus's face so completely, he looked like a corpse. "They have been living on my money for 20 years, Arthur said. "The houses, the cars, the company seed money, it was a loan, contingent on their good behavior. If they hurt Elara, the loan is called in, immediately." Arthur smiled one last time. "Good luck, Marcus. I hope you let her walk into that courtroom, because if you don't, you won't just be broke. You will be destitute." The video ended. The screen went black. For 5 seconds, no one breathed. The implications hung in the air like smoke. My parents hadn't just lost the $500 million they were trying to steal. They had just lost every dollar they had spent for the last 20 years. They owed the estate millions. They were bankrupt. "You," Marcus whispered, standing up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "You set this up. You knew." "I didn't know," I said calmly. "Arthur knew. He knew you better than you know yourself." "This is entrapment," Beatrice shrieked, standing up to join him. "He can't do this. We spent that money. It's gone." "Then you will sell the house," I said, my voice cutting through her hysteria. "And the cars, and the jewelry, and VTech Ventures." "I will kill you," Marcus roared, lunging across the aisle toward me. It happened in slow motion. the man who had always been too dignified to raise his voice, the corporate titan, the loving father figure on the news, was now a feral animal. He scrambled over the divider, eyes bulging, hands reaching for my throat. "Bailiff!" Judge Garrison shouted. But I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. I stood there, muddy and bleeding, and watched him come, because I knew he wouldn't reach me. The bailiff tackled Marcus mid-air, driving him into the carpet with a heavy thud. 2 sheriff's deputies burst through the side doors, pinning him down. "Get off me!" Marcus screamed, thrashing like a caught fish. "It's my money. It's mine." Beatrice was screaming now, a high, thin wail of total collapse. "Marcus, stop! You're making it worse." Judge Garrison stood up, his face purple with rage. He banged his gavel, not once, but 3 times, each strike sounding like a judgment from God. "Order!" he bellowed. "Order in this court!" The deputies hauled Marcus to his feet. He was panting, his expensive suit disheveled, his tie crooked. He looked at me, and there was no love in his eyes, only the black void of a narcissist who has lost his reflection. I looked back at him. I felt nothing. No fear, no sadness. Just the cool, clean feeling of surgery being finished. The tumor had been cut out. "Mr. Vane," Judge Garrison said, his voice shaking with suppressed fury, "your client is in contempt, and given the evidence I have just seen, I am referring this entire matter to the district attorney's office immediately. We are talking about kidnapping, assault, wire fraud, and grand larceny." The judge looked at me. His expression softened. "Ms. Vance," he said, "are you injured? Do you need medical attention?" "No, Your Honor," I said. "I just need a ruling." Garrison nodded. He sat down and adjusted his robe. He grabbed his pen. "The court finds," he said, speaking clearly for the record, "that the petitioners, Marcus and Beatrice Vance, have acted with malice and intent to defraud. The motion for guardianship is denied with prejudice. The poison pill clause of the Arthur Sterling Trust is hereby activated." He signed the paper with a flourish. "The estate is yours, Ms. Vance, in its entirety." I let out a breath I had been holding since I stood in the security line at the airport. My knees felt weak, but I didn't fall. Silas put a hand on my shoulder, squeezing it gently. "It's over," he whispered. I looked at my parents, who were being handcuffed by the deputies, the same handcuffs they had wanted for me. "No, Silas," I said softly. "It's not over. We still have to collect the debt." And as the bailiffs led them away, Marcus looked back one last time. He didn't see a daughter. He saw a creditor. And that was exactly how I wanted it. The chaos in the courtroom was not the chaotic noise of a riot. It was the suffocating, frantic energy of a collapsing star. Marcus and Beatrice Vance were not just losing a lawsuit. They were watching the gravitational pull of their entire existence invert. The bailiffs had pulled Marcus up from the floor, but he was sagging in their grip, his face a mask of purple rage and disbelief. Beatrice was still screaming about the money, her voice shredding the dignified air of the probate court like a bandsaw. "You can't do this," she shrieked, pointing a manicured finger at Judge Garrison. "We spent it. It's gone. You can't make us pay back 20 years of expenses. That is millions of dollars." $7.2 million, to be exact, Silas Thorne said, looking at his spreadsheet. He didn't look up. He just twisted the knife with the precision of an accountant. "Plus interest compounded at the federal rate. You are looking at a judgment of nearly $12 million against your personal assets." Leonard Vane, the lawyer who had been so smooth, so confident only an hour ago, was frantically stuffing papers into his briefcase. He looked like a rat sensing the water rising on the Titanic. "Your Honor," Vane stammered, stepping away from the defense table as if it were radioactive. "In light of the revelation regarding the falsified police report and the planted evidence, I am formally moving to withdraw as counsel. I cannot represent clients who have used my firm to facilitate a federal crime." "Granted," Judge Garrison said, barely glancing at him. "Get out of my courtroom, Mr. Vane, before I decide you are an accessory." Vane didn't walk. He fled. The heavy doors swung shut behind him, leaving my parents alone in the center of the room, isolated, bankrupt, exposed. Marcus looked at me. The shock was fading, replaced by a cold, concentrated hatred. He straightened his tie, shaking off the bailiff's hand. He tried to summon the ghost of his corporate authority. "You think you're smart, Elara," he spat, his voice trembling. "You think this video proves anything. So what? We tried to stop you. We were worried. A jury will understand that parents sometimes go too far to protect a sick child. You might get the money, but you won't keep it. We will tie you up in appeals for the next 10 years. We will drain that trust dry with legal fees." He laughed, a harsh barking sound. "And you almost missed it anyway," Marcus sneered. "You had to run through the woods like an animal. You got lucky. If that truck hadn't started, if the plane hadn't landed, you would be locked out, and we would be signing the checks right now. You won by a coin flip." I stood there, gripping the podium. The mud on my clothes was drying into a stiff, uncomfortable crust. My feet were throbbing, but I didn't feel weak. I felt the kind of calm that comes after the hurricane passes, when the landscape has been flattened and you are the only thing standing vertical. "You are wrong, Marcus," I said softly. The room quieted down. Even Beatrice stopped sobbing to listen. "I didn't win by a coin flip," I said, "and I didn't get lucky." I reached down and picked up the muddy, dented silver Halliburton briefcase. I placed it on the defense table, right in front of where my father was standing. "You focus so much on this case," I said. "You saw it on the security cameras. You saw me clutching it at the airport. You assumed it contained the original will, the medical records, the leverage. You assumed that if you stopped the bag, you stopped the evidence. I spun the combination dials. Click, click. But you never asked yourself one question," I said, looking him in the eye. "Why would a data analyst, who specializes in secure logistics, carry the only copy of a $500 million document through a public airport terminal?" Marcus frowned. The arrogance flickered. "I opened this case for the FBI agent," I said. "But he was looking for anthrax. He didn't look at the papers. He didn't read them." I popped the latches. I threw the lid open. The courtroom stretched its neck to see. Inside the case, there were no medical records. There was no will. There were no affidavits. The case was filled with stacks of blank printer paper, 5 reams of bright white, 20-pound bond paper, completely empty. Marcus stared at the paper. He looked at me, confusion knitting his brow. "I don't understand," Beatrice whispered. "Where are the papers?" "They are already here," I said. "I mailed the certified originals to Judge Garrison's chambers via secure courier 3 days ago. They arrived yesterday morning. The clerk logged them in before the courthouse even opened today." Judge Garrison cleared his throat. He reached under his bench and pulled out a thick-sealed FedEx envelope. He held it up. "She is correct," the judge said dryly. "I have had the verified will and the medical timeline in my possession for 24 hours. I was simply waiting for the hearing to formally enter them." Marcus looked as if he had been struck by a physical blow. "But then why did I go to the airport?" I finished for him. "Why did I let you track me? Why did I carry a decoy briefcase and act terrified?" I took a step closer to him. "Because I didn't just need to beat you in probate court. Dad, winning the money wasn't enough. As long as you were free, as long as you were concerned parents, you would never stop. You would appeal. You would harass. And most importantly, you would keep control of Leo." At the mention of my brother's name, Beatrice flinched. "Leo is 14, I said, my voice hardening. "He is currently stuck in that boarding school in Switzerland where you sent him, so he wouldn't ask questions about why Grandpa stopped visiting. You control his custody. You control his life. As long as you are his legal guardians, I can't get him out." I looked at the judge. "There is a clause in the state family code," I said, citing the law I had memorized months ago. Section 402. A parent convicted of a felony involving domestic abuse, fraud, or endangerment of a family member loses presumptive guardianship rights. The court must appoint a new guardian. I turned back to Marcus. I couldn't just sue you for the money. That is a civil matter. It doesn't strip custody. I needed you to commit a crime, a felony, a serious, undeniable, federal crime. I gestured to the empty briefcase. So I gave you a target. I walked into that airport like a lamb. I let you see the bait. I knew you couldn't resist. I knew you would try to stop me. And I knew that because you are arrogant. You wouldn't just slash my tires. You would go big. You would call the FBI. You would file a false report of terrorism. I smiled, and it was the coldest smile I had ever worn. I didn't run through the woods to save my inheritance. Marcus, I ran through the woods to make sure the police report was filed. I needed you to cross the line from greedy relatives to federal criminals. And you did. You did exactly what Arthur and I predicted you would do. Marcus stared at me. The horror in his eyes was absolute. He realized, finally, that he hadn't been hunting a rabbit. He had walked into a bear trap. "You set us up," he whispered. "You crazy bitch. You entrapped us." "I gave you a choice," I corrected. "You chose to call the bomb squad." Just then, the sound of heavy rotors thumping against the air grew loud outside the building. The windows of the courtroom rattled in their frames. It wasn't the wind. It was a helicopter landing on the courthouse lawn. The double doors at the back of the room burst open again. This time, it wasn't a lawyer. It was Agent Harrow. He was still wearing his suit from the airport, but he looked different. He wasn't the bored bureaucrat anymore. He was flanked by two other agents in windbreakers that said FBI in bold yellow letters. He walked down the center aisle with a stride that ate up the distance. He didn't look at me. He looked straight at Marcus and Beatrice. "Agent Harrow," Marcus shouted, seeing a lifeline. "Thank God, arrest her. She just admitted it. She admitted the briefcase was a decoy. She wasted police time." Harrow stopped at the railing. He looked at Marcus with a mixture of disgust and professional satisfaction. "Carrying a briefcase full of blank paper isn't a crime, Mr. Vance," Harrow said, his voice carrying to the rafters. "It's a stationary supply run. Do you know what is a crime calling in a biological threat on a commercial airliner to settle a family score?" Harrow pulled a folded document from his jacket pocket. "Marcus Vance, Beatrice Vance," Harrow announced. "I have a federal warrant for your arrest issued by the United States District Court." Beatrice let out a strangled cry. "No, you can't." "The charges include," Harrow read, "filing a false report of terrorism, conspiracy to commit obstruction of justice, wire fraud, and violation of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act for the remote destruction of evidence on a protected device." Harrow motioned to his team. "Cuff them." The agents moved in. There was no polite request to turn around this time. They grabbed Marcus's arms and twisted them behind his back with practiced efficiency. The click of the handcuffs was loud, sharp, and final. It was the exact sound I had heard 5 hours ago in the terminal, but this time, it sounded like music. Beatrice tried to pull away. "I didn't make the call. It was him. It was all him." "We have you on video planting the powder, Mrs. Vance," Harrow said coldly as the female agent spun her around. "That is tampering with evidence and creating a hazard in a secure federal facility. You are looking at 10 years minimum, mandatory sentencing." Marcus was struggling, his face pressed against the defense table. "Elara," he screamed, his voice cracking. "Elara, tell them to stop. We are your parents. You can't let them take us to federal prison. Think about the scandal. Think about the company." I walked over to him. I looked down at the man who had terrified me for 26 years. The man who had threatened to make me disappear. The man who had deleted my life with a button press. He looked small. He looked pathetic. "I am thinking about the company," I said quietly. "VTech Ventures is going to be liquidated to pay the judgment. And as for the scandal?" I leaned in close, so only he could hear me. "The live stream is still running. Dad, you wanted the world to watch. They are watching." I pointed to the back of the room. A court reporter had her phone up, live blogging the arrest. Marcus slumped. The fight went out of him. He realized there was no negotiation. There was no settlement. This was total annihilation. Harrow looked at me. He nodded, a small gesture of respect. "Ms. Vance," he said, "we will need your statement again, but we can wait until you get some shoes." "Thank you, Agent," I said. "Take them away," Harrow ordered. The agents marched my parents out. They didn't walk with the dignity I had tried to maintain at the airport. They were dragged, shuffling, weeping, begging the empty air for mercy. Beatrice's heels clicked unevenly on the floor, a staccato rhythm of defeat. When the doors closed behind them, the silence returned to the courtroom, but it wasn't tense anymore. It was empty. The heavy, oppressive weight that had hung over my family for decades was gone, sucked out the door with them. Judge Garrison exhaled a long breath. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "In 30 years on the bench," he said, looking at me with a weary smile, "I have never seen a probate hearing end with an FBI raid." "I apologize for the drama, Your Honor," I said. "Don't apologize," he said. "Justice is rarely this cinematic, but we have one more matter to settle." He pulled a file from the stack. "With the parents in federal custody, the minor child, Leo Vance, is effectively without a guardian. The state would normally place him in temporary foster care pending the outcome of the trial. I am petitioning for custody," I said immediately. "I am his sister. I have the means to support him now, and I have the space." "You have the means," the judge agreed, looking at the judgment paperwork. "But do you have the intent?" "He is the only family I have left," I said. "I did all of this the airport, the mud, the risk for him. I am not leaving him in Switzerland." Garrison nodded. He signed the order. "Petition granted. Emergency temporary guardianship is awarded to Alara Vance. You can go get your brother, Ms. Vance." I looked at the paper in his hand. It was just a piece of paper, like the ones in my decoy briefcase. But this one had power. This one was freedom. Silas Thorne closed his laptop. He looked at me, his eyes shining. "Your grandfather would have loved this," he said. "Especially the part with the blank paper. That was devious." "Arthur taught me that the best weapon is the one your enemy thinks he sees," I said. I picked up the silver briefcase. It was lighter now. It was empty, dented, and muddy. It had served its purpose. I looked at my muddy feet, my ruined blazer, and the empty seats where my parents used to rule my world. I turned to the judge one last time. "Am I free to go, Your Honor?" "You are free, Ms. Vance," Judge Garrison said, "in every sense of the word." I turned and walked down the aisle. I didn't run. I didn't rush. I walked with the slow, steady pace of a woman who owned the ground she was stepping on. I pushed the doors open and stepped out into the hallway. The storm outside had broken. Through the high windows of the lobby, a shaft of sunlight was cutting through the clouds, hitting the marble floor. It was bright. It was clean. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the only thing I had left from the morning, the crumpled receipt from the airport coffee shop. The one I had held while Beatrice planted the trap. I crumpled it up and tossed it into the trash can. I needed to buy a new phone. I needed to buy a new pair of shoes. And then I had a plane to catch. But this time, I wasn't flying cargo. I was flying to Switzerland. And I wasn't going to be late. Judge Garrison did not just sign the order. He finalized an ending to a 20-year siege. The scratching of his pen against the heavy bond paper was the only sound in the room, loud and definitive. He looked up at me, his face softened by the exhaustion that comes after witnessing a family destroy itself, and delivered the final blow to the Vance empire. "The assets of the Arthur Sterling estate are released to Alara Vance effective immediately," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the empty chamber. "Regarding the defendants, Marcus and Beatrice Vance, due to the substantial flight risk indicated by their access to offshore accounts and their demonstrated willingness to fabricate federal evidence, bail is denied. They will remain in federal custody pending trial." Denied bail. Those two words hit me harder than the inheritance itself. My parents were not going home to their mansion. They were not going to strategize with crisis PR teams. They were going to a cell, tonight and tomorrow night, and likely for every night for the next decade. The wall of invincibility they had built around themselves with money and influence had not just cracked, it had evaporated. "Thank you, Your Honor," I said. My voice was quiet. I didn't feel like shouting. Victory, I was learning, was not a loud celebration. It was a quiet, heavy settling of the soul. I walked out of the courtroom doors, leaving the smell of old wood and desperate lies behind me. The hallway was empty. The reporters had rushed outside to catch the footage of my parents being loaded into the federal transport van. I walked slowly toward the exit, my bare, muddy feet making soft slapping sounds on the marble. I didn't care. I wore the mud like a badge of honor. It was the evidence of my survival. I pushed open the main doors of the courthouse. The storm had broken. The heavy charcoal clouds that had chased me through the valley were tearing apart, revealing a sky of piercing, washed clean blue. The air smelled of wet asphalt, pine needles, and ozone. It was the smell of a world that had been scrubbed raw and was ready to begin again. Silas Thorne was waiting for me at the bottom of the stairs. He was leaning against his car, a sensible, older sedan that looked out of place among the luxury SUVs usually parked there. He held a large brass keyring in his hand. He didn't say anything at first. He just looked at me muddy, bruised, holding a dented briefcase and smiled. It was the smile Arthur used to give me when I figured out a complex puzzle on my own. "You look like hell, Elara," he said gently. "I feel like I just crawled out of a grave." "Silas," I replied. Walking down the steps, the sun felt warm on my face. But I suppose that is exactly what I did. He held out the keys. They were heavy, cold metal, not the sleek plastic fobs of modern life. "These are for the estate," Silas said. "Not your parents' house, Arthur's house, the manor. He wanted you to have them the moment the gavel fell. The staff has been expecting you for 3 weeks." I took the keys. My fingers closed around them, and I felt a jolt of connection. These were the keys to the library where I learned to read, the keys to the garage where Arthur taught me to change a tire, the keys to the only place I had ever felt safe. "Do you want to ride?" Silas asked. "Or do you want to drive the truck?" I looked across the parking lot at the battered, rusted Ford pickup I had rented from the pilot. It was sitting there, listing to one side on its blown tire. Covered in mud, it looked like a warrior that had died on the battlefield. "Leave the truck," I said. "I will have it towed and repaired later. I think I am done driving for today." I climbed into the passenger seat of Silas's car. He started the engine, and we pulled out of the courthouse lot. Passing the swarm of news vans at the gate, I saw a cameraman point his lens at us, but I didn't duck. I just watched him slide past the window, a blur of irrelevant noise. "We stopped at a tech store on the way," Silas said, handing me a small white box. "I figured you might need this. Your old number is irrecoverable. So this is a new line, clean slate." It was a new smartphone. I opened the box and turned it on. Silas had already preloaded the basics. Almost immediately, the notifications began to populate, but they weren't the threats from my father or the gaslighting texts from my mother. They were from the world. My name was trending. The dashcam footage of my mother planting the powder, which had been released into the public record during the hearing, had leaked. The internet, which had hated me 4 hours ago, had swung 180 degrees. "I am so sorry we doubted you. This is the bravest thing I have ever seen. Your parents are monsters. Stay strong. Justice for Elara." Thousands of them. Strangers who had called me a terrorist at 8 o'clock in the morning were calling me a hero at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I scrolled for a few seconds, watching the tide of public opinion shift like sand in the wind. It was validating, yes, but it was also hollow. They didn't know me. They didn't know the girl who used to hide in the closet to avoid her father's temper. They just liked the drama. They liked the ending of the movie. I pressed the power button and held it down. The screen went black. "Not checking your messages?" Silas asked, glancing over. "No," I said, tossing the phone into the back seat. "I don't need their apologies, Silas, and I don't need their praise. I know what happened. That is enough." We drove in silence for an hour. leaving the town behind and climbing up the winding roads into the high country. The trees here were taller, ancient redwoods and pines that blocked out the sky. This was Arthur's country. When we turned into the driveway of the Sterling estate, I felt a physical weight lift off my chest. The house sat on a rise overlooking the valley, a sprawling structure of stone and timber that looked like it had grown out of the earth rather than been built upon it. It wasn't ostentatious like my parents' glass and steel fortress in Silicon Valley. It was solid. It was permanent. Silas stopped the car at the front steps. "I will leave you here," he said. "I have a lot of paperwork to file, and I need to start the extradition process for your brother." "Leo," I said, the name tasting like hope. "How long?" "A week," Silas said. "Maybe 2. We have to get the emergency custody order domesticated in Switzerland. But he is coming home. Alara, you did it. He is safe." "Thank you, Silas," I said, "for everything." He nodded, his eyes misty. "Arthur would be proud. Not because you won the money, but because you fought." I got out of the car. I watched him drive away until his taillights disappeared around the bend. I stood alone in the driveway. The silence of the mountains was profound. No sirens, no shouting, no engines, just the wind in the trees and the distant call of a hawk. I walked up the stone steps and put the heavy brass key into the lock. It turned with a satisfying, heavy thunk. I stepped inside. The air in the house was cool and smelled of cedar, old leather, and the faint, lingering scent of pipe tobacco. It smelled like Arthur. Nothing had changed. The rugs were worn in the places where he used to pace. The books were piled on the side tables. It was a museum of a life well lived, preserved in amber. I walked into the library and sat down in his leather armchair. I was still wearing my ruined, muddy clothes. I curled my legs up, resting my chin on my knees, and looked out the massive window at the view he had loved so much. For the first time in 10 years, I let myself cry. Not the angry, adrenaline-fueled tears of the morning. These were deep, shaking sobs of release. I cried for the little girl who had been so lonely in a house full of people. I cried for the parents I wished I had, instead of the ones I got. I cried for the sheer exhaustion of having to be strong for so long. When the tears stopped, the sun was setting, casting long, golden shadows across the floor. I felt hollowed out, but clean. I stood up and went to the desk. I found a notepad, Arthur's stationery, and a pen. I began to write, not a journal entry, but a plan. My parents were gone. The threat was neutralized. I had more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. The question was no longer how to survive, but how to live. Marcus had said that the best revenge was living well, but he was wrong. Living well was passive. I wanted something active. I wanted to build a fortress, not just for myself, but for everyone else who had been trapped in the blind spot of the legal system. I wrote down the name, the Sterling Defense Initiative. I would use the inheritance, the very money Marcus and Beatrice had destroyed their souls to get to fund a legal organization dedicated to victims of financial abuse and coercive control. I would hire the best lawyers, the ones who knew how to fight narcissists, the ones who understood that a stolen passport or a remote-wiped phone is just as violent as a bruise. I would make sure that the next Alara Vance didn't have to hijack a cargo plane to get a fair hearing. I would turn their greed into a shield for others. That was the revenge. Not making them suffer prison would do that, but making their defeat the seed of something they would have hated: charity, justice, protection for the vulnerable. I showered, scrubbing the mud and the dried blood from my skin until I was pink and raw. I put on a set of clothes I had left here years ago, an oversized wool sweater and jeans. I felt like myself again. There was one last thing to do. I walked out the back door, across the stone patio, and down the path that led to the family cemetery. It was a small, quiet plot, enclosed by a wrought iron fence, shaded by a massive oak tree. Arthur's grave was fresh, the earth still mounded, covered in the flowers from the funeral 3 weeks ago. The headstone was simple granite. Arthur Sterling, 1945 to 2026. Truth is the only legacy. I stood there for a long time, The evening star was just becoming visible in the twilight sky. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the crumpled piece of paper I had retrieved from my pocket before the shower. It wasn't the receipt. It was the boarding pass for the flight that never happened. The flight Marcus had canceled. I knelt down and placed the paper on the dirt, weighing it down with a small, smooth river stone. "I made it, Grandpa," I whispered. The wind rustled the oak leaves, a sound like a sigh. "They tried everything," I told him, speaking to the stone as if he were sitting right there on the bench. "They tried to make me look crazy. They tried to make me a criminal. They tried to erase me." I touched the cold granite. "But I remembered what you taught me. I didn't fight them with their weapons. I didn't scream. I didn't lie. I used the truth, and the truth was heavy enough to break them." I stood up. The air was getting cold, but I didn't feel it. I felt a warmth in my chest, a burning ember of purpose that wouldn't go out. "I'm going to get Leo," I promised him. "I'm going to bring him here. We're going to be a family again, a real one. No contracts, no leverage, just us." I turned away from the grave. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Arthur wasn't in the ground. He was in the house, in the books, in the fund I was about to build, and in the spine he had helped me stiffen. I walked back up the path toward the house. The lights were on in the library, casting a warm, inviting glow against the darkening mountain. It looked like a lighthouse. My parents were in a cold cell, surrounded by concrete and the consequences of their own choices. I was walking toward a library, a brother, and a future that was entirely, completely mine. The nightmare at the airport felt like it had happened to a different person in a different life, that Alara was a victim, that Alara was running. I wasn't running anymore. I reached the back door and paused, looking out over the valley one last time. The world was vast and complicated and sometimes cruel, but it was also open. I stepped inside and closed the door against the night. Thank you so much for listening to Alara's story. It has been a wild journey from the security line to the courtroom, and I hope you felt every twist and turn along with me. I want to hear from you. Drop a comment down below and tell me, where are you listening to this story from right now? Are you in your car, at work, or maybe at an airport, hoping your flight doesn't get canceled? Let's connect in the comments. And if you enjoyed seeing justice served cold, please make sure to subscribe to the Family Revenge Stories channel, hit that like button, and smash the hype button so this story can reach even more people who need to know that sometimes the good guys do win. Stay safe, stay smart, and never let anyone erase who you are.